share the screen. And go to, can you see the screen?
I can.
Okay, great. So let's look at your work. Your work looked great, as I recall. So yeah, where were you that you had snow?
You know what? We have a cabin in Arnold.
Okay,
And
uh-huh,
so during, this like remote learning and stuff, we've been kind of going back and forth between Santa Cruz and there.
right.
And so that's where we were. And all of a sudden we had snow. And I thought, okay, this is perfect because my husband decided to barbecue in the snow.
I saw that. That was great.
And I'd never done that before. So I thought, okay, this is a good good time to shoot.
Good photo op, right?
Yeah.
All
And
right. So,
and this right here is we live in a condominium in Santa Cruz, and this is
uh-huh,
right outside. We have a garden, and he loves to
cool.
garden, so I wanted to get a picture of him in his garden.
Great. Yeah, perfect. They looked great. Let me just go to the settings here. Here we go. Yeah, so normal plus -1 and +1. Yep. Mm-hmm. Exactly what I wanted to see. Um, in terms of framing, you might get rid of the chair in the foreground,
Oh
but
yeah,
aside from that, yeah. Um, just a minute. So yeah, maybe move around to the left just a bit. So you still have the garden, but a little less of that tree in the tree, sorry.
yeah,
Chair in the foreground.
yeah. And you know what? And at that moment, you're right. I should probably be more aware of that kind of stuff, but I didn't even think about it. I was so focused on the
That's
bracket.
exactly what yeah, especially when you're doing like an assignment or you have something new
Mhm.
in the mix,
Right.
then
Yeah,
it kind of,
my brain was just it could only handle one thing, I
that's
guess.
that's my brain, definitely. Okay, let's see here. Oh yeah, great capturing of the egret. Very
Yeah.
nice. Was that right there?
Uh-huh. Yeah,
Condominium? Oh,
yeah, we have a little like common area with just a ton of grass. And
uh-huh.
whenever it's wet out there, usually in the mornings, these things come and they just hang out there. And I thought, oh my God, I have to get a picture of one of them.
Excellent. Yeah, very cool. Which one do you think works best for you of the exposures?
I think maybe the
Uh,
middle one, yeah, that one. I think I
yeah.
tend to like things a little bit more like underexposed, you know?
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
Yeah.
it's a maybe even halfway between. So in this one, the midtones, they look good like the grass.
Mhm.
Um, in this one, the egret, you'd get the beautiful detail in the whites.
Yeah.
So yeah, in order to get detail in the highlights, you have to underexpose. In
Mhm.
order to get detail in the shadows, you have to overexpose.
Right. Yeah.
So yeah, it's
So,
a
one thing
trade-off.
I noticed, like, I understand the idea about the histogram and how it shows like the brights and the shadows and stuff.
Uh-huh.
But for some reason, my mind, like, I don't get it. Like, if I look at the histogram, and a lot of times they say, "Oh yeah, look at your histogram to see if you have a good exposure."
Hmm.
But let me ask you something: are the are the little like peaks and everything, is that supposed to be in the middle, or like how would I know, judging from the histogram, what a good exposure would be?
You see, it kind of depends on the image
Okay.
as well. So let's say you're photographing this egret in snow,
Yeah.
then everything would block up to the right, which is where the whites are, I guess what they're saying is you don't necessarily want these really high peaks, but this is saying that the blues go way, way up,
Yeah.
meaning you have a lot of blues, really.
Hmm.
And so, I guess histograms can certainly be useful, but I don't think they're telling you a whole lot that you don't know by looking at the image.
Mhm.
So let's see, this image, this is the overexposed one. And you can
Yeah,
see everything's moved to the right, which is
right.
the lighter area.
Yeah.
Uh, because there's nothing here on the left that tells us there are really no true blacks.
Mm.
Okay. Um, which can certainly indicate that the image is overexposed. But it can also indicate that you're in a scene that just doesn't have any true blacks,
Yeah.
you know? In the highlights, it's kind of surprising that you don't have brighter whites in the histogram because you can see that the whites, like on the bird and up at the top, they're pretty bright.
Mhm.
So I would have expected to see a bit of a more of a peak there, but and then here in the underexposed, everything's moved over to the left because it's
Mhm.
dark.
Yeah.
Right. And it's saying that even the brightest areas here are closer actually to being midtone, what would normally be a midtone.
Yeah.
So, I mean, histograms can certainly be useful, but I certainly don't think that they are the be all and the end all,
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay, so good job on bracketing.
Thank you.
Equivalent exposures, they looked great. Um, let's see, so you started here at, actually the histogram says it, I don't have to look. So F5 at 1/100th of a second at, ooh, a high ISO,
It
great.
was, yeah, I
Yeah,
had a really high ISO. And
so
that's why it looks so grainy too. I realized that, like, my ISO was really high.
considering how high it is, it's not bad. you know, it's I can see a little grain, but it's not terrible. Let me just go to in the develop module, we can take a look here at noise. And my noise reduction is not on. So sometimes it kind of defaults to a setting like that, and you can see that's better.
Oh, yeah.
Um, and I'll do the luminance as well. And that definitely has smoothed things out, probably a little bit too much. It's given him a facial, which maybe wanted to have. uh, but even without that on, you can see a little more noise, but for almost 12,000 ISO, that looks great, it's good, definitely. So that is the largest aperture, and here's the smallest at f32. So we can just compare them.
Yeah, and as you can see, that one's blurry because the shutter speed was so slow at that point, I think.
Right.
I was hand holding it. I don't think I had a tripod on me that time.
That's pretty good for it's about half a second. Yeah, you caught some of, it looks as if you caught more of his motion than your motion. So that's pretty good.
Mm,
His head moved a little bit and his
yeah,
jacket. But since there are areas that are still, like the tree,
yeah.
that means that you were pretty still. That
Oh,
he
that's how
was in
you can tell,
motion.
huh?
What's that?
That's how you can tell.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So let me, maybe that's a little too close. So, I mean, there's a little motion back here. It's a little blurry,
Yeah,
the trees and the building, but he's the one who's really blurry,
yeah,
and you can almost see a double image there,
right.
um, here with his jacket.
Mhm.
So he moved definitely. And it's hard to to hand hold.
Yeah,
Uh, and have it still at slow shutter speeds.
Yeah.
I'm just looking at, and your focal length was normal. So yeah, yeah, it looks good. Definitely. The thing that you can tell usually with uh, looking, comparing f5 to f32 is depth of field, how much of the frame is in focus from the foreground to the background, which is the next assignment. And so with a small aperture, which would be the one on the left, you'd expect to see more in focus from the foreground to the background. And with the large aperture, this one, f5, you expect to see less of the background in focus,
Yeah.
which is not necessarily happening that much. So in part that's motion, and in part that is because you're further away from the subject, so you don't see it as much.
Yeah. Now, how did you get these two pictures to be side by side like that?
A good question. So right now I'm in the library module,
Yeah.
and I clicked on the first image, and then I held down the command key and
Oh,
clicked on this last image or whichever one I want.
right.
And then I went down here where it says XY,
Oh, okay.
and that's the compare. I think it's called compare. Yeah, compare view,
Okay.
like that. And to get out of it, you just click on it again. If you want to compare more than one, let's say these three, you can't do it in compare, but you can do it in this one to the right of it, which is called, I always forget these, sorry, the survey view.
Okay. Oh, wow.
So you can isolate certain images by selecting them and then clicking one of these view modes.
Yeah, nice. Okay.
The only other thing I'd say about these is, again, with your framing, um, and again, it's not something that we think about automatically, but kind of usually, for most of us,
Yeah.
not all. Uh, Looking at the horizon and making it horizontal. So you see how the railing kind of slopes downward,
Oh, yeah.
and you can straighten it to a certain amount by using. I click on the R key, but that's the cropping,
Oh,
tool.
okay.
Um, so you can rotate however much you want, and you can crop as much as you want. You could come in and bring the edges down a bit and maybe do something like that. And depending on how much space you leave behind him and in front of him, it kind of changes the nature of the image.
Right.
So if you don't leave much space behind him, it's as if he's entering the frame.
Oh, yeah. Uh-huh.
But if you leave a lot of space in the behind him and not as much in front, then it looks as if he's leaving the frame.
Yeah.
So things you can decide, when either when you're shooting or after the fact. And if you hit return, it crops it. One nice thing about Lightroom is that you're never actually altering the images themselves. So it's non-destructive. If you've ever worked in Photoshop, you know that everything you do actually, when you save it, it actually changes the information. And so you need to save different versions, and you shouldn't work on your original. If you want to keep the original information, you should make a copy and work on that. And each time you have a finished image that you like, you should save it as such in Photoshop. But in Lightroom, you never actually work on the image. It's as if you've put a piece of clear acetate over an image and you're kind of sketching in all these things that you're doing. And the information is saved, all these rules, algorithms, and so on. All that information is saved, but it's never actually applied to the original file.
Yeah, that's
So
amazing.
it's really cool.
Yes. Now, when you make a change like that, like the changes that you made, does
Mhm.
it save automatically, or is there a button to press to save what the
It
changes?
saves it.
Oh, okay.
Uh, so down here, uh, when I'm in the develop module, which is where you work on your images, there's a history. So if you look on the left
Oh, yeah.
hand side, there's a history of everything that I've done. And unless I actively decide to get rid of that history, it remains. And it remains every time you reopen Lightroom, which is also really nice because in Photoshop it disappears.
Right. Yeah.
Um, so it will always be there. If if you've manipulated this image to the degree that you like, let's say we change the color temperature a tiny bit, or just tweak things,
Yeah.
uh, and you like what you've done, um, but you don't necessarily think that's the only place you want to go with that image, you can go up here to where it says photo in the drop down menu and create virtual copy.
Oh, okay.
And so if you look down here, it's a little hard to see because the images look the same.
Yeah.
But in this slideshow at the bottom, I now have a new image and it says copy #1.
Okay.
So this is the copy. And if you look at the history, it now just says create virtual copy. And don't panic that the history has disappeared. It's in the original.
Oh, okay.
So it's still here in the original, but with the virtual copy, now you have a copy of what you did to that point.
Oh, nice.
Okay, and you
Yeah.
can do that as many times as you want. You can make as many copies as you want.
Okay. Now, when we're doing our assignments, like I haven't worked on I think our next one is on white balance. So I don't know, I guess I just thought that we had to submit them sort of like just straight out of camera, but you're
Yes,
saying we, we can tweak them before we send them to you, or we should just continue to just do,
just continue to submit them as you shot them, but hopefully you're working in Lightroom on your own with your images.
yeah, I
So
haven't been, to be honest, I mean, I played around with it initially, and then I've just been so busy playing with like the lighting stuff that I told you about, but I
right.
really want to learn this, and so I want to get back to it.
Absolutely. So yeah, just do that on your own. Again, for the assignments, turn them in as they are, I should
Yeah,
say. um, you can convert them. If they're raw, you can convert them to JPEG if you want, but either way is fine.
yeah,
But I want to see them as you shot them for the
yeah,
assignments. Okay.
yeah. So far, I haven't shot anything in RAW. I know they say, that it's better to shoot in RAW, but I've never done that. So
Mhm.
that's maybe my next step at some point,
What you can do is, but I'm going to assume your camera does it. Most of them do. Um,
You
you
can do
can
both, right?
you
Like
can do
J.
both. Yeah.
Yeah,
So
I think I saw that on my camera at one point, that that's one of the things I can select.
yeah.
Um, and I don't know, maybe it's just fear of not knowing. So I just haven't tried it yet.
Yeah, it won't, I mean, there's nothing different. It doesn't change anything when you're shooting. It
Okay.
will use more of your memory card
Uh-huh.
because, it's storing two images instead of one. Um, and if you're short on space, you'll notice that. But most people have memory cards at this point that are so huge,
Uh-huh.
like 32 gigabytes, that you're still going to get, close to 1,000 images probably, even when you do that.
Yeah.
So unless you're like my sister who never takes images off her memory cards, you can see stuff from years past, um, you shouldn't have a problem.
Yeah, no, I try to delete them once I upload them. So what I usually do, because I'm not that familiar with how to store them, I don't want to take up all the space on my own, computer. But what I usually do is I upload them onto Shutterfly,
Okay.
and that's sort of like what I've been using as like storage, for photos and stuff.
If you're shooting raw, and in general, I think it's a good idea to have your own external hard drive.
Hmm.
They're pretty cheap, relatively speaking.
Hmm.
You can get a little one about this size that holds like 3 terabytes of information for about $100 at Costco.
Yeah,
So I definitely recommend doing that. Shutterfly is great, but it's good to have your own backup
right.
anyway,
That's true. Yeah.
and especially if you're shooting raw, um, the files are much larger, and so you won't be able to store as much on Shutterfly. In fact, I don't know what their rules, regulations, limitations are, uh, but you should find that out, you know.
Yeah.
Um, but I think it's a good idea to have your own hard drive and store, have a copy. It's
Yeah.
kind of like having a hard copy,
Yeah.
not quite.
That's
You know,
true. Yeah. Yeah. Okay.
if God forbid something happened to Shutterfly and they lost their information. You never
Well,
know.
I
Right?
I would be in a lot of trouble because all my stuff is on there.
Yeah, I would definitely do that, and as you have time, start, downloading stuff from Shutterfly onto an
Right.
external hard drive. Then you
Yeah,
don't have to take up the room on your computer either.
yeah, that's true. Yeah. Okay. Yeah, well, thank you for that feedback and those tips. That really helps.
Absolutely. So we'll just look at your ISO images briefly, and they look great. Look at all that stuff.
Mhm.
So what I would expect to see here, with the lowest ISO and highest ISO, is it, as we looked at with the first images, more and less noise.
Mhm.
So this one here is ISO 100, and this is ISO 2500. Um, and again, your camera does really well with ISO, and
Mhm.
so I don't see a huge difference even coming in close at 300%. The 2500 looks really good. Um, and we saw that even at 11, I think it was 11,400,
Yeah.
um, that looked pretty good. So I guess I can see a tiny bit more here, but it's almost impossible to tell. And again, this is magnified quite a bit.
Mhm. Mhm.
So yeah, that's what I would expect to see with the ISO. And you did the assignment perfectly. Great
Thank you.
job.
Thank
Yeah.
you. All
Yeah.
right.
Yeah. Cool. I look forward to seeing your next assignment. About your light meter, and according to the information that I found, you should be able to see the light, what you can see of the light meter in